He's been called one of the greatest artists of all time.
If my shit does have some type of mass appeal to it, then that's good. You know what I'm saying? It reaches a wider audience, but I don't try to compromise myself for nobody.
And the best rapper in the world.
Jay-Z, Notorious B.I.G., Tupac, those people that people mentioned, none of them, not even close, had the sort of impact that he did.
One of music's most controversial performers, he's caused offense with everyone from Christina Aguilera to President George W. Bush.
I love the media. I thank God for the media because you guys give me shit to talk about.
He was almost like a Siri. He was a voice. He was the only one that was actually kind of telling the truth.
Always making headlines. He's married the same woman twice and being sued by his mother.
Is he a violent person? Is he a bad husband? Is he still an addict or an alcoholic? A real-life soap opera, for lack of a better term.
He is the poet of his generation, and he sold over 86 million albums to prove it.
It's impossible to copy. You can't clone that guy. You can't be a derivative white rapper. No one can even touch the guy.
In a world of manufactured pop and manufactured rock, this was a true artist.
He is the king of hip-hop, a wordsmith extraordinaire. He is Eminem. Born Marshall Bruce Mathers III on October 17, 1972, in St. Joseph's, Missouri, his childhood was not an easy one.
I think the best way to describe his environment is grim. It was poor. It was trailer trash. His words, not mine. It was incredibly an impoverished way to grow up.
His grandmother was, allegedly abused by her mother, which would be his great-grandmother. So he's got this dysfunctional family.
And it seems history repeated itself when Marshall's mother, Debbie, married Marshall's dad, Bruce Marshall Mathers II, in 1970. In 1972, the family moved to North Dakota, and Bruce took over the family business. But it appears Bruce Mathers II was a difficult character. Life in the Mathers household was very volatile, and after many months of fighting and instability, Debbie moved back to Missouri, while Bruce took off to California. It's alleged that he was never heard of again. Marshall was only 18 months old. It was an abandonment that would have a serious impact on the rest of his life.
For the young Eminem, for Marshall Mathers, the abandonment by his father at an early age left him with a sense that the male into whose care he was entrusted did not think highly enough of him to stick around and make sure he was okay. So one of the defining and most important relationships in Eminem's life was his relationship with his mother, Debbie.
Eminem has never painted a pretty picture of his mom, Debbie Mathers. He's called her a pill popper. He said she was unreliable, that she was never around, that she dated the wrong kind of guys.
Marshall and his mother, Debbie, moved between various towns, including St. Joseph, Savannah, Kansas City, and Warren, Michigan. He has said it was like we were always starting over.
Every few months he's moving from place to place, and he's got no stability in his family life, no anchor where he can sit down and say, this is who I am, this is where I live, this is my part of the world.
The following years proved very unstable for Marshall. He changed schools every 2 to 3 months.
One of the things that's most disturbing for children is when they move from place to place, they're always making new peer groups. They're always having to get to know people all over again. When you go into a peer group as a new kid, you always start at the bottom of the pack, and then you've got to fight your way up. And because he had many disadvantages in that battle, 1, he was white, 2, he was small, he was timid, he was introverted, he was an artist, he was all those things, he was never going to make it or be accepted in the groups into which he was thrust.
Eventually, Debbie Ann Marshall settled in Detroit, a city charged with racial tension. Only a few years earlier, race riots had wreaked havoc on parts of Detroit. Now, Marshall found himself one of the only white kids in a predominantly black school.
You know, he was a victim of kind of reverse racism. His peer group was not one in which he could belong. He was a white kid in a black neighborhood. So you've got nowhere for him to go. And once a boy loses his male role model, well, then the peer group is the substitute. And what did his peer group do to him? Ostracized him.
Marshall was a loner as a child and was said to have been hyperactive and medicated on the ADHD drug Ritalin. As a kid, Marshall got lost in the comic book world of superheroes, and he loved drawing his own creations. But he had a very tough time in school.
Eminem was in a sort of situation where he was constantly struggling. He was struggling at school. He was bullied tremendously. He was struggling to be heard at home. So all of those things came to a head in his teen years. They were incredibly formative years because they helped create the superstar rapper that we all know today, and that was all born of those years. But at the same time, it was like, it was a constant battle. It was a battle with his own inner demons. It was a battle with people outside, and it was literally physical fights with kids that he knew.
Bullying can be devastating for a child, and for the adult that child becomes. Everybody wants to belong, and the person who's bullied is being told physically and emotionally that you don't belong here. And not only do you not belong here, we are going to punish you simply for who and what you are.
Then things took a very dark turn.
It reached the point where in the famous song he wrote called Brain Damage, where he talks about the guy who literally put him in a coma. It could have killed him. But the beatings didn't stop there, they just carried on. When he recovered from his coma, it just carried on. It wasn't as if he was subject to isolated acts of bullying. It was sustained bullying over an entire childhood, right through his teenage years. And that's where his creativity comes from. That's where his artistry comes from. It's the person he met when he turned away from the world and looked inside to try and find some anchor and some way of making sense of this craziness into which he was born and in which he was growing up.
Debbie's youngest brother, Ronnie Nelson, who was the same age as Marshall, introduced him to hip-hop when he was only 11 years old. It was music that would change his life forever.
I've been writing lyrics since I was like 14 years old, you know, and just the more I wrote, the better I kept getting at it.
For Eminem, you know, there had been white rappers. Third Base was a popular white rapper. Beastie Boys were popular white rappers, but for the most part, well, the white rapper had been a novelty.
His uncle Ronnie, who he was very, very close to, and he introduced them to music like Beastie Boys' License to Ill.
White, not black. You might not believe me, but it is like that. When you come to my show, watch me go.
Yeah, honest. Thank you.
He was also into like Two Live Crew and, you know, some of the rappers that were coming up in the late 80s and early 90s. One of his biggest influences was NWA and Dr. Dre. You know, Dr. Dre, who he ended up working with and continues to work with, you know, his exposure to this guy who would end up being his mentor was also just his exposure to the genre in general.
But in 1988, life changed drastically for Marshall when Kimberly Scott entered his life. His mother, Debbie, had always wanted a daughter, and when the chance came to foster Kim, Debbie grabbed it with both hands. But it was a decision she was soon to regret.
His mother describes the rows that he used to have and the fights he used to have with Kim when they were growing up. And she said, but he never laid a finger on her. He would go out, she said, and he would punch the car. And she said that car had so many dents in it you wouldn't believe. But he never laid a finger on Kim.
The one thing Debbie hadn't bargained on was Marshall falling in love with Kim. He was 15 at the time she moved in, and a year later, they were in a highly volatile sexual relationship.
Kim and Eminem and Kim and Debbie, everybody was fighting. It was a very turbulent environment. By Eminem's own admission, he described himself as a child. He said, I was puny, timid. So you have this puny, timid child among these warring women.
After repeating the 9th grade twice, due to truancy and near-failing grades, Marshall dropped out of college. He became a fast food chef at Gilbert's Lodge at St. Clair Shores, Detroit, living on the minimum wage. Life in the Mathers household was tough, and his relationship with Kim was proven very tricky. Then in 1991 came the news that shocked and brutalized Marshall to his core.
Bud, this is Ron Polkinghorn.
Well, life's hard, bud.
His Uncle Ronnie, who had been like a brother, killed himself with a shotgun to the head. The normally amiable Ronnie had given few signs of his utter despair. His grandmother, Betty, sent Marshall a video of the funeral, but he refused to watch it. He was totally devastated by Ronnie's death.
The man who introduced him to rap, his beloved Uncle Ronnie, took a gun and shot himself. And he shot himself, apparently, after being jilted or dumped by a girlfriend. So again, you have two potential male role models. One who abandoned him when he was only 6 months. Then his beloved Uncle Ronnie, who abandoned him by killing himself.
That's just a harsh reality to deal with no matter who it is. But when it was someone so close to you, it can really mess you up. And I think it really messed up Eminem. But at the same time, it also gave him something to write about, you know, emotions that he needed to get in touch with. And those feelings, I think, turned into, you know, some of the greatest raps that we've ever heard.
Ronnie was mentioned in the songs Stan, Cleaning Out My Closet, and My Dad's Gone Crazy.
Remember when Ronnie died and you said you wished it was me? Well, guess what? I am dead. Dead to you as can be.
A grief-stricken Marshall now turned more than ever to his music for comfort. Marshall hooked up with his buddy Proof and started getting into the local hip-hop scene. It was then that he officially became known as Eminem.
Proof was sort of a legend in Detroit. He, I believe it was at St. Andrews Hall. Proof would host these open mics, and he was one of the best rappers. And he was the kind of guy that, you know, brought Eminem in, because obviously it was kind of an adverse circumstance for him, you know, being the only white guy in these like heavily antagonistic crowds.
Hip hop just became a thing that he did. That was his salvation. You know, maybe not necessarily seeing it as a way of getting out of Detroit, but, you know, just as a way of dealing with being in Detroit.
So Eminem's music career had begun, but his personal life was in freefall. Kim became pregnant, and Eminem's daughter, Haley Jade Scott, was born on Christmas Day, 1995.
Haley has been an important part of Eminem and Marshall Mathers' life, you know, both musically as well as, you know, as a father.
She's mentioned on numerous records. He's really dedicated a lot of time to her.
Haley's birth brought a new lease of life for Eminem, and he started writing furiously.
When he was working in a fast food restaurant, they used to try and make rhymes out of what was on the food menu and rhymes out of what people were ordering.
Every time I sit down and write a rhyme or a song, I want it to be completely different from the last song I wrote, and I want the rhyme style to be completely different, the beat to be different, so I consider myself a perfectionist, and I always want to try to top my last song that I did.
For him to have grown up with all those disadvantages and to have honed his artistic ability so finely, and the only way he knew to do that was to take everything that life had thrown him on the chin and to rise above it.
Eminem started rap battling on the Detroit club scene in places like St. Andrews Hall and The Shelter, normally home to an all-black audience.
A lot of rappers came up, battling was sort of the way that you did it. It's kind of become less so, but you know, at rap at its roots was, you know, it's like kind of a mono, like I'm gonna go head to head.
It's one thing to be able to, you know, record in the studio and say interesting stuff that you've written down, but a lot of people think that if you can really come off the top of your head, can really perform before an audience, can make your opponent look bad, then you're a real bona fide rapper.
When you freestyle rap like that, you develop a very unique style. You have to, because you're not writing to a specific beat. You're like gonna typically have like a helter-skelter kind of flow, and you develop your own one.
Around the time, there were few white rappers about. By performing in places like The Shelter, Eminem proved himself a true pioneer and a brave one.
He'd get on stage and he said at first people would boo him just because he was white and wouldn't even give him a chance.
Proof would host the evenings, and the freestyle rapping battles that ensued were often vicious. And at times, Eminem was ridiculed. The white kids didn't want him playing black music, and vice versa. Along the way, he suffered some harsh reverse racism. He also faced so much rejection.
He had a reputation as being highly unpredictable. I mean, there are stories of him diving into the audience once and starting a fight because somebody tried to hit him or somebody had insulted him or whatever it was. It's as if he'd found this vehicle to express himself, and he'd found an outlet for his emotions, for his rage, for his pain, and he'd lost his inhibition. He just was letting himself go.
The rapping battles were all about who could put the best lyrics together. And slowly but surely, Eminem's genius started to shine through.
For a white rapper to get any sort of credibility, he would have to be above and beyond everybody else to get any kind of respect. He's just kind of a one of a kind.
Just to see, from what I've read, to see him perform live was just something that people hadn't really experienced.
He lived and breathed rapping. Meanwhile, Kim was not happy that he was spending so much time on his music, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. His first song release was Backstabber, inspired by a fight he and Kim had had. It was local DJ Lisa from radio station WDRQ who eventually gave him his big break. He called her persistently to get on his show, and she finally gave in. He was then signed to FBT Productions in 1992, run by brothers Jeff and Mark Bass, who ran an indie label called Web Entertainment. 4 years later came the release of Eminem's album, Infinite, in which he explored the struggle of raising his newborn daughter and his desire to break out of poverty and make it in the music business.
He hadn't developed a voice yet. You know, he still was he was a good technical rapper, but there's a huge difference between being a good technical rapper and being like a great artist. You know, like to be a great artist, I think to great rapper, you have to have your own voice, you have to have your own character.
But Infinite proved the flop, and the constant negativity he faced in the rap battles started to get to Eminem. He became depressed and took to abusing drugs and alcohol.
After the failure of his first album, Eminem allegedly tried to commit suicide. He has this dream, which his Uncle Ronnie instilled in him, of being a rap artist. And then he releases his album and then it flops. He's used every resource, every available resource he's got left. At that point, his world must have caved in. He must have felt as if whatever he did, there was no way out for him from the prison that he felt he was in. He must have hit absolute despair.
But incredibly, out of the terrible darkness came inspiration. Eminem had come to the realization that the only way out of his miserable existence was to become a music star. But he would have to be different. And so he created Slim Shady an alter ego that would launch him onto the contemporary music scene.
It obviously means he's like an incredibly tenacious person. He's very driven. He's obviously has kind of a streak of egotism, because I don't think you can go that far unless you kind of have, like, I've always thought that the best thing an artist can have is like a healthy streak of delusion. And obviously Eminem had a healthy streak of delusion. Otherwise he would have quit. I think when he touched on Slim Shady, that was his way of like kind of developing this character that, you know, hip hop hadn't seen before.
Could you briefly tell us where one stops and the other one begins, and the difference between the three different characters?
Marshall Mathers stops when the Bacardi kicks in, and then it's Slim Shady. Eminem starts when I hit the stage, so it's the best way I know how to answer that.
Through his Slim Shady persona, Eminem wrote and recorded violent and dark songs with a comical twist, revealing the darker side of his nature.
The whole concept of alter egos is not foreign to hip hop, and a lot of rappers have taken on these other identities to basically say what they really want to say. But Eminem really made an art out of it. He took feelings that were his own, put them into a caricature, and put them out to the world, so that if they infuriated you, you weren't necessarily mad at Marshall Mathers. You were mad at Slim Shady.
Slim Shady allowed Eminem to get a little bit of distance and take more chances in terms of like what, you know, his subject matter, in terms of talking about what was going on in his life.
When you buy a Slim Shady album, you're gonna get Slim Shady. You're not gonna get birds and bees and flowers and trees. You're gonna get up you suck it. That's what you're gonna get, because that's what I'm about. And I don't feel like I have to compromise my style for nobody. You know, just because MTV or BET might pick up on a video, you know what I'm saying, or whatever. You know, if my shit does have some type of mass appeal to it, then that's good. You know what I'm saying? It reaches a wider audience, but I don't try to compromise myself for nobody.
After the Infinite album, he came out with a Slim Shady EP, and that was the first example of him using this character, and he really started coming into his own, and that EP really got people talking.
It became an underground phenomenon. I remember hearing him getting played on like late night mix shows on Power 106. And the interesting thing about Eminem at the time was you didn't know if he was a white guy or a black guy. You just turned him on the radio and you're like, wow, that was a really interesting song. It was this self-deprecating, weird character who was kind of always out for retribution, but just getting beaten up and stuffed into lockers. And it kind of harkened back to like kind of the rap that a lot of people came up on, like the Far Side, you know, rap that didn't take itself that seriously, but at the same time it was very lyrical, and it was obviously somebody who was serious about their craft.
The Slim Shady EP made its way to rap meister Dr. Dre, who instantly recognized Eminem's genius.
Dr. Dre, when he, you know, backs you, I mean, that's about as big of a cosign as you could possibly have. This was right around the time 2001 came out. He was still a guy you see for a hit.
It's like, okay, yeah, thanks Eminem, but Dr. Dre!
A lot of people at first were kind of talking to him about, well, should he be taking on a white guy? And Dre said, well, this guy is just too good. I can't let him go.
It would have been a lot easier for Dre to dismiss me like most people did. What's with the white guy from Detroit that raps with the funny voice? But he didn't. He stepped up to the challenge because he saw something in me. And for that, Dre, I'm forever grateful, man.
Eminem needed kind of that cosign, because otherwise no one was going to take a rapper very seriously. But how could you not take, you know, the man that did nothing but a G thing seriously?
What did you think of each other, honestly?
I thought he was a He probably thought worse than me.
I thought he was Tweety Bird. No, because he had this real bright yellow sweatsuit on.
Man, if I hear one more thing about that great black sweatsuit, I had this yellow outfit on when I first met Dre. It was like this outfit that a clothing company had given me, and I didn't have money like some people had at the time. You know, so I was going on a week wearing it, so it was actually turning kind of green. But he called me a banana when he met me, so it was on from there.
But what made the relationship between Dr. Dre and Eminem so special?
Once I met Dre, it was kind of like I had a vision of where I wanted to take it, and Dre just showed me how to take it there. You know what I mean? it's kind of like we both had the same like vision for myself, you know, where to take it and whatnot. And Dre just showed me how to execute it.
Shortly after signing with Dr. Dre, Eminem released an album that was to become a worldwide smash hit.
Hey, we gotta do it.
I remember hearing it and thinking it was fun. It was dark, but it had a sense of humor to it. It had like a sort of wink to it. And it made a huge impact. It really came at a very unexpected time. Grunge was already in the past, and I feel like the music industry was struggling to find a voice for the millennium, which ended up being rap rock. Eminem is a huge part of that, and the reason it became popular.
My name is what? Excuse me.
The first thing is like, okay, what's this guy? This guy's name's Eminem. Okay, he's a white guy. Like, Dr. Dre's in this video. It's just like one of those moments where you just remember exactly where you were when you first see it. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know if I like this or not, but this guy is going to be huge.
Hi, kids. Do you like Primus? Wanna see me stick 9-inch nails to each one of my eyelids?
Visually, musically, in any aspect, unlike anything I'd ever seen before.
It's like his ID badge, you know? It's like, here is what makes up the rapper that I am today. And he didn't hold anything back, you know? And nobody was safe from the wrath of Eminem.
I was surprised, yeah, when My Name Is blew up, I didn't know exactly what it was gonna do. I mean, this was my first time, you know, actually doing this or whatever. It was my first time exposed to the public, and I never considered myself anything more than an underground artist. You know what I'm saying? Just because of the subject matters I talk about and the way that I rap or whatever, the things that I talk about, I thought, you know, I was surprised, to be honest.
It was the beginning of, I'm gonna tell it like it is. And my name is Slim Shady, and this is why I can tell it, because it's not Marshall Mathers, it's this other person who can pass judgment on the industry and what's happening in music and what's happening in the world.
There's always a deeper meaning people think behind when I say but it's not. It really means when I say up.
In 1999, Eminem created Shady Records. It was a discerning business move, enabling the rapper to own all the rights to his music and lyrics.
Most rappers, when they reach the level that he has or even lower than that, they, you know, like to diversify. They get into, you know, clothing lines, they get into restaurants. You know, and Eminem didn't really do a lot of that, but he did start his own record label, Shady Records, in conjunction with Aftermath, which was the label that signed him.
Eminem's mom, Debbie, also sued him for around $10 million that year over alleged slander about her and his lyrics. In 2001, she is said to have won $1,600 in damages. And it wasn't just Debbie that was giving Marshall grief. In 1999, after 10 years of an on-off relationship with Kim, the couple got married. But only a year later, the storm clouds were gathering.
They had a very tortured relationship with Kim, but if you look at it closely, I mean, he went back to her like 3 or 4 times. So there's obviously like a sincere romantic streak there. I don't know if you can really categorize him as a misogynist. I think he's somebody that's been burned, and he'd been burned a lot of times. And I think that's probably jaundiced his view of not just women, but I think everything. But then all of a sudden he's the most famous rapper in the world. How's he gonna have like a normal kind of relationship?
The Marshall Mathers LP was released in May 2000, breaking the record set by Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style as the fastest-selling hip-hop album.
The Marshall Mathers LP came not long after NSYNC broke the record for the most number of albums sold in a week, which is over 2 million albums. Marshall Mathers came in at 1.76 million in a week. I mean, those are like astronomical figures, and if anyone had any doubt as to his star power or where Eminem could potentially go as an artist, the Marshall Mathers LP kind of cemented the fact that he's here to stay.
The first single, called The Real Slim Shady, was a massive success.
The chorus is saying, "Will the real Slim Shady please stand up?" And basically what the whole song, the concept of the whole song was about was, you know, trying to say that there's a Slim Shady in all of us. Everybody has a shady side to him. So in the video, I'm telling I'm asking, will the real Slim Shady please stand up? And everybody's standing up in the video because everybody's got a Slim Shady in them. I said that a long time ago when I came out with my first album. I feel like everybody has a shady side to them, and a side to them where they can be an asshole, you know. And Slim Shady is that asshole inside of me that comes out an awful lot.
It's the return of the... Oh, wait, no, wait, you're kidding. He didn't just say what I think he did he?
Eminem or Marshall, Slim Shady, whoever you want him to be, again, is playing with the idea of his identity. Who is he? Who is the real Marshall Mathers? Who is the real Eminem? Who is the real Slim Shady? It's a provocation to people. He's provoking his audience and saying, who do you say I am?
I'm Slim Shady, yes, I'm the real Shady. All you other Slim Shadys are just imitating. So won't the real Slim Shady please stand up? Please stand up. Please stand up.
Eminem was the needle that punctured the balloon. You had Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, NSYNC, and he was the one who it felt like, you know, when you were a young teenage boy kind of growing up, and hating all that stuff because it was just so manufactured and so glossy and so slick, and it just did not ring true to reality. Eminem was kind of like that, like he was like almost like a seer, he was a voice, he was the only one that was actually kind of telling the truth.
I'm like a head trip to listen to, cause I'm only giving you things you joke about with your friends inside your living room. The only difference is I got the balls to say it in front of y'all, and I don't gotta be false or sugarcoated at all.
At that point, like, Eminem had become a lightning rod for criticism because of the things he had to say about homosexuals, about race, about women, and, you know, the things he was saying was, you know, people were paying a lot more attention this time around.
In The Real Slim Shady, Eminem parodied artists like Christina Aguilera and Marilyn Manson.
I say some things about some boy-girl groups and some other things about some other people, whether they deserved it or not. You know, in my book, they do, if they're corny. So I brought it to a lot of sissies, basically.
Sit me here next to Britney Spears. Christina Aguilera better switch me chairs so I can sit next to Carson Daly and Fred Durst and hear them argue over who she gave to first.
He has a great knack for like deflating something in one line. He can just cut somebody down to size in one line. Like where he's talking about Moby and he goes, it's over, nobody listens to techno.
Moby, you can get stomped by Obi. You 36-year-old boy-headed stand. You don't know me, you're too old, let go, it's over. Nobody listen to techno.
It was right at the time when, like, you know, there was this 1999 techno boom. He was like, right, like it was over. His career was done.
In another single, Stan, Eminem attempts to deal with his newfound fame, taking on the persona of a deranged fan who kills himself and his pregnant girlfriend.
Stan was really like the perfect way to bring in the mainstream radio listeners to this, what had been considered a more underground hip-hop world, and it was by sampling a Dido song. The lyrics of Stan are so intense, the video is so intense, the sentiment and the idea that you could have a fan who expects so much of you but has never met you.
Dear mister, I'm too good to call and write my fans. This will be the last package I ever send your ass. It's been 6 months and still no word. I don't deserve it. I know you got my last 2 letters. I wrote the addresses on them perfect.
He poured out his feelings of how he deals with fans and how he feels about fans and how he feels, you know, that they want something from him, that people are always trying to get a piece from him. And it was actually incredibly valid.
The end of Stan, where he finally, you know, writes back to Stan and says, look, I'm sorry I'm so late in writing back. But of course it's too late, because at this point Stan has killed himself and his wife and his unborn child. It shows a kind of desperation really from Eminem, as if, you know, what can I do? You know, I can never ever give these people what they want, and they will make of me what they will.
Eminem's career may have been flying, but his personal life remained critical. In 2000, Eminem's hit song, Kim, wrote about Kim's death.
Here, I swing with you. Somebody help! Don't you get it, bitch? No one can hear you. Now shut the fuck up and get what's coming to you.
People think this is crazy. This guy wants to kind of slaughter and butcher his wife. No, this is the rage and the pain he feels. This is the fantasy that he has. The reality of Eminem was very different. Through his alter egos, he is simply expressing the impotent, unexpressed rage and pain of the underdog, not something he was literally going to do.
That same year, Marshall was arrested for assaulting bouncer John Garrett, whom he claimed was kissing Kimberly in a bar at the time. Later that year, Kim attempted suicide by slashing her wrists. By the beginning of the following year, Eminem had filed for divorce after Kim's second drunk driving conviction. Kim also filed a $10 million defamation suit against Eminem for the song Kim. In an interview on ABC's 2020, Kim made it clear that she blamed Eminem's fame for the violent demise of their relationship.
It just seems like ever since he's got, famous, blew up, our relationship went downhill from there, He became arrogant and cocky, and everything that he did for me or the kids, he has to be praised for.
But despite his personal life being in tatters, Eminem's music career continued to soar. He hit the headlines once again when he performed with Elton John at the Grammys in 2001. It was described as the hug heard around the world because of Eminem's use of homophobic lyrics in the past.
He was courting a lot of controversy. People were, claiming that he was homophobic, that his lyrics were misogynistic, that, that he was really like a blight on music, on pop music. And to sort of combat all that negativity, he did what people really just did not expect, which is he performed with Elton John on the Grammys.
That just kind of showed how Stan, the message of that song, and the power of Eminem's music, transcended what a lot of critics would say about it.
The morning rain clouds up our window, and I can't see it all.
Elton John is an incredibly savvy music fan, and he's very passionate, and he knew the talent that Eminem had and recognized it, and I think he was sensitive enough to hear the irony and the satire that is really a tough thing in pop music.
And this was at a time when Eminem was being, in his own words, being protested against, where, people all over the world were condemning him for what they believed him to be, particularly for his homophobia. Gay and lesbian rights groups across the world were condemning his lyrics. They believed him to be a rabid homophobic who was encouraging and sanctioning violence against homosexuals. And yet, here he was, appearing on stage with Elton John. What does that say about him? Remember, this was an artist who grew up being the underdog. He identified with the victim, not the aggressor. This was a boy who was beaten for the color of his skin, who was beaten because he was small, who was beaten because he was timid, who was beaten because he didn't fit in. And is this man really going to be someone who's going to want to see the same thing happen to other people who don't fit in or who are not socially acceptable? No. And what he's really saying when he gets on stage with Elton John to his audience was, deal with this then. If you think I'm this rabid homophobic, deal with this, and you make sense of it.
2002 proved an incredible year for Eminem. His third major album, The Eminem Show, was released and quickly became another hit, going straight to #1. The album reflected his rise to fame, his relationship with Kim and Haley, and his status in the hip-hop community.
It's really Eminem at the top of his game, not just as a rapper, not just as a pop star, but as a cultural figure.
The Eminem Show was just another example of how much of a force he was in music at the time. It was the best-selling album of 2002. Nothing even came close.
The first single was Without Me, which, was in the vein of, The Real Slim Shady, as well as My Name Is.
Looks like a job for me, so everybody just follow me. 'Cause we need a little controversy, 'cause it feels so empty without me.
The video was kind of funny, it took on like Osama bin Laden and, a lot of the pop culture things of the time.
There's a line in the song that makes perfect sense, which is, guess who's back?
But sometimes, man, it just seems everybody only wants to discuss me. So this must mean I'm disgusting. But it's just me, I'm just obscene.
It's like all he had to do was just come back and do what he does best without having to change up the formula too much. People wanted that Eminem.
That same year, Eminem signed 50 Cent to his Slim Shady record label.
While Eminem was an outcast from the industry on account of being white, on account of being from Detroit, 50 Cent had angered so many people by dissing them on record, by being just kind of a loose cannon that the two kind of related.
The signing of 50 Cent was a move that proved Eminem was more than just a good rap artist. In fact, by now, he had become an integral part of American popular culture.
I remember going into somebody's car, a girl's car, and they would have an Eminem CD next to a Backstreet Boys CD next to a Britney Spears record. And it was funny because these three things are kind of, you know, mutually opposed to one another, but he had crossed over to that point where it wasn't like he was safe, because he wasn't safe like they were, but he was somehow pop friendly.
2002 was also the year Eminem blazed onto the Hollywood scene in the motion picture 8 Mile. It was the realization of a dream he had talked about with Dr. Dre when they first got together.
Yeah, me and Dre have been discussing a movie that we would like to do. We've been talking about it for like a year now. We were talking about doing a movie about, you know, based on my life.
And 8 Mile proved an astonishing acting debut for the rapper.
What he did was prove that he couldn't be put in a box. You know, as much as we could say like, oh, well, Eminem does this and he does it really well and he's funny and he's, you know, witty and he gets the concept of music videos and he really draws people in. Well, this was another side of him that was much more nuanced, that took talent that people didn't realize he had. It was just an amazing experience, I think, for Eminem and for the viewers and for people at home who didn't have an appreciation of all that he could do. 8 Mile really, really stepped it up.
In that movie, you see Eminem, no holds barred, expressing his feelings, his emotions with a rawness and an intensity and a purity and a skill that is rarely seen in a world where so many celebrities try to whitewash themselves. They try to project an image to the world of something that's kind of all American, all apple pie, all sweetness and light. This was a guy who stripped his life to the bone and said to the world, this is who I am, deal with it. He did it in his music, and in 8 Mile, he showed not just his skill as an actor, but his ability as an actor to get the guts of his personality out and to express it on screen in a performance that any actor would have been proud to call their own.
He recorded several new songs for the soundtrack, including Lose Yourself, which won an Academy Award for Best Original Song of 2003.
Lose Yourself. It's this like massive kind of pounding, driving intensity where he's like rhyming every single word on top of each other, and it's like technically flawless.
It's getting even harder trying to feed and water my seed plus see this order caught in between being a father and
Lose Yourself won an Oscar for Best Original Song. Now, if you look back before Lose Yourself, what would typically win that? You know, it'd be the Bodyguard soundtrack, or just Bruce Springsteen from Streets of Philadelphia. Hip hop was just completely ostracized from that sort of world.
True to form, Eminem did not turn up to receive his Oscar.
Probably the Academy needed Eminem more than Eminem needed the Academy. They wanted the audience that could potentially bring to them.
In 2004, unable to live without each other, Eminem and Kim had reconciled and married for the second time in 2006. But only 3 months later, Eminem had filed for divorce yet again. It seems the rapper and his muse couldn't live with or without each other.
Unfortunately for him, a lot of his problems stem with his personal life in terms of his addictions, as well as his relationship with his wife, who he divorced, and they got back together, and then they got remarried. A real life soap opera, for lack of a better term.
In 2004 came the release of Eminem's fourth album, Encore.
Encore was viewed as a misstep because it started to feel like Eminem was a caricature of himself. It's not like it's a terrible album or the songs weren't that good. It just felt a little bit like a parody, like a cliche. And Eminem, who was always so ahead of the curve and so like out of left field and forward thinking and trailblazer in so many ways, this felt like he was following himself.
Despite the critics, one of Eminem's biggest hits ever came from Encore. Just Lose It was a critical attack on Michael Jackson.
What else could I possibly do to make noise? I done touched on everything but little boys. That's not a stab at Michael, that's just a metaphor. I'm just psycho.
That was, oddly enough, the one time where people said maybe Eminem went a little too far. Maybe not even in terms of controversy, but just being in poor taste.
All right, now lose it. Just lose it. Go crazy.
Stevie Wonder, out of all people said, it was like kicking a man when it was down. When Stevie Wonder calls you out, like, that's maybe time to show you have to pump your brakes a little bit.
A week after its release, Michael called into the LA-based Steve Harvey show to report his displeasure with the video. Steve Harvey declared on air, "Eminem has lost his ghetto pass. We want the pass back." Michael Jackson wasn't the only person Eminem upset with Encore. He was even said to have been investigated by the CIA after allegations that he had threatened the president, George W. Bush, in his songs We as Americans and Marsh.
I must have struck a chord with somebody up in the office, cause Congress keep telling me I ain't causing nothing but problems, and now they're saying I'm in trouble with the government. I'm loving it.
I believe the things that I say are controversial. Me, it's just speaking my mind. So speaking my mind and telling it like it is makes me controversial, then whatever. I say whatever on my mind, But I had a good teacher,
The song Mosh got really political. It was at the time when John Kerry was facing George Bush in the presidential election, and it took a strong stance against Bush.
Raise hell, we gon' let them know. Storm, push, shove, mush, fuck Bush, until they bring our troops home, come on.
With Eminem, you still have to realize that, he's from Detroit, he's from the American Midwest, and a lot of his fans are what you might typically consider like rock fans who typically vote Republican. And that was a bolder move than I guess, people could really see it for, but nonetheless, as an album, Encore was it was like a clear step down, and it got by on commercial momentum. It still sold well, it's still a #1 record, but, it preceded Eminem taking a long, long time off from music.
Eminem's withdrawal from the music scene at this time may well have had something to do with his personal circumstances. Soon after the release of Encore, tragedy knocked on his door once again. His uncle Todd, who had been like a father figure to him, took a shotgun and shot himself in the head, just as his brother Ronnie had done only 13 years earlier. Tragically, still more disaster was around the corner for the musician. In 2006, Eminem's childhood friend Proof was killed in a club brawl on 8 Mile Road in Detroit. The argument is said to have been over a game of pool. The devastated Eminem spoke movingly at his funeral at the Fellowship Chapel, Detroit. He also went on to write 2 songs dedicated to Proof, one called Going Through Changes and another called You're Never Over. That same year, Eminem embarked on his first U.S. concert tour in 3 years, the Anger Management 3 Tour, featuring 50 Cent, Lil Jon, The Alchemist, and others. But by August, the European leg of the tour had been canceled, and Eminem had entered rehab for a dependency on sleep medication.
As you would expect, not just for somebody in Eminem's world, but for somebody with Eminem's personal history, that at some point along the line, addiction to something would come into it. Alcohol was present, allegedly all sorts of illegal drugs were present, and Most famously, prescription drugs were present. What's important to remember is that most addictions start from feelings of abandonment, feelings of rage, feelings of shame, and that's the root of those addictions.
In 2009, the rapper renewed his old collaboration with Dr. Dre and created a new album called Relapse.
It got mixed reviews, it really alienated a lot of people. I actually always describe it to people as the best album that I've never want to listen to ever as long as I live, because it's like, it's horrifying.
Causing illusions again, brain contusions again, cutting and bruising the skin.
But like on a technical level and on a creative level, it's kind of masterful how intricately Byzantine and bizarre and just warped some of these like murderous fantasies are. And it's really interesting to think that this is the most popular, it was the most popular rap album, you know, because whatever Eminem does at this point is so popular.
Relapse reestablished Eminem's presence in the hip-hop world. And at the MTV Movie Awards that year, he stole the show. When Sacha Baron Cohen descended upon the audience, landing on top of him, causing Eminem to storm out of the awards in apparent disgust.
He acted like he'd never 69'd a guy before. I mean, come on, when I had my face in his Kugelsack, I could see why he was called the real Slim Shady. It was getting a little fat.
It was reported the following day that the whole thing had been staged between them.
Good luck.
Eminem's seventh studio album, Recovery, was released in June 2010, and once again went straight to #1. It was also the year's best-selling album.
Recovery, it's about how Eminem got sober, dealt with his demons, dealt with, you know, his problems as a father, as a husband, as a human being.
It felt more inviting. You could tell by the songs like Not Afraid, Come Take My Hand, We'll Get Through the Storm Together. Like, he seemed a lot more open to other people. And I think that in the years that we've sort of gotten to know him and his music, he always felt a little solitary. So that, I think, is the biggest difference in Recovery that I noticed. It was just open.
The first single, Not Afraid, debuted at #1.
I'm not afraid to take a stand, everybody.
Not Afraid really took a hard look at the bad things Eminem had done in his life. You know, not just as a rap star, but as a father, as a husband, as a human being. He can overcome these things, that he can get over his crippling addictions. It's a very empowering song for a lot of people. There's a positive message, which is something you couldn't really say about Eminem's previous work.
It was closely followed by another smash hit, a collaboration with Rihanna called Love the Way You Lie.
Just gonna stand there and watch me burn.
Love the Way You Lie was a huge hit, partly because Rihanna was on it and she was just the hottest thing at the moment.
It was kind of a bold move because Rihanna had gone through a very abusive relationship. You know, you could kind of see the parallels between Rihanna and Chris Brown, as well as Eminem and Kim Mathers. You know, both very high profile, lots of violence, lots of lots of dirty laundry being aired. You know, it all seemed to deal literally with what Eminem was going on. You know, it was no different than 8 Mile in that aspect, where it was like only a slight fictionalization of what was probably going on in his life.
I can't tell you what it really is. I can only tell you what it feels like. And right now it's a steel knife in my windpipe. I can't breathe, but I still...
He is one of the greatest and most influential, impactful artists of our time. And I think Recovery just drove that point home. Anyone who had had any negative feelings or criticisms about Eminem, or maybe just didn't buy into the hype, could no longer ignore the fact that Eminem is, like, you know, on par with the greats.
Eminem is now an active rap producer. Besides being the executive producer of D12's first 2 albums, Devil's Night and D12 World, he has also produced tracks by well-known rappers like Obi Trice, 50 Cent, Lloyd Banks, Tony Yayo, and even Jay-Z. The greatest MC of all time, as he's become known, now has 13 Grammy Awards to his name. And he continues to astound with his genius rapping techniques and thrilling play with words.
people appreciated that if you come from a poor background and maybe even your entire life were told that you'd never amount to anything, that's more reason and more motivation to make it. You know, he's incredibly inspirational in that sense. And I can't imagine that there's any rapper in the world who hasn't looked to Eminem and said, if he can do it, I can do it too.
Eminem still, to this day, has the most popular record in America, and nothing is like that. Eminem, you know, no one can sell CDs, but Eminem can sell CDs because he has this fan base.
In terms of like straight up pure skill, he might be the best technician to ever reach that multi-platinum level ever. I mean, in terms of pure skill, he has respect across the board.
For me, I still feel like I'm an underground artist, regardless of how many units I sell. The subject matter and the topics that I rap about are still underground. You know what I'm saying? They're still raw. I don't try to, polish up my shit for nobody. I don't, I tell it like it is.
He sees the demons. He knows they're there, and sometimes they're out of control. But the best music has always been about, in whatever genre, is understanding the human condition.
The thing about true artists is they don't lose their creativity. The older he gets, the more his talent and his artistic creativity will ripen, mature, and change and morph into something else. One thing you can be sure of, we will be hearing about Eminem, and he will be creating until the day he dies. And what he creates will always be worth listening to, always be worth watching, and always be worth talking about.